8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engines full power and liftoff. Go Falcon, go Starlink.
The battle for the internet has left the ground. The new frontline is the sky. Starlink didn't just launch satellites. It launched a new kind of power, a network that floats above borders, above governments, above the old rules of sovereignty. When it kept Ukraine online during wartime conditions, the world saw the future. When it pierced Iran's firewall with thousands of Starlink terminals smuggled into the country during the protests, governments realized something far more dangerous. The internet was no longer under their control. It was above it. And that single shift, from ground to orbit, forced every major power to rethink what sovereignty means in the 21st century. China moved first. Russia followed. Both understood that if they didn't build their own systems in space, they would be dependent on someone else's. Because satellites aren't just tools anymore. They're assets. They're targets. They're leverage. And the nations that dominate orbit will dominate the century. When the Russia-Ukraine's war started, communications were soon cut. But then Starlink switched on. Suddenly, Ukraine had a communications system that Russia couldn't bomb or shut down. A system that didn't run through Ukrainian infrastructure at all. For the first time in history, a private company kept a nation online during a war. That wasn't just a technical achievement. It was a geopolitical shockwave. A killer example came with Iran. During the protests, thousands of Starlink terminals slipped past their firewall. A foreign network operating inside a sovereign state without permission. For governments watching around the world, this was the nightmare scenario. A network they couldn't regulate, couldn't censor, and couldn't turn off. It didn't matter whether people used it or not. The possibility alone was enough to change national strategy. Starlink represents something no state has ever faced. It's not territorial. It's not dependent on local infrastructure. It can appear over any country. And it can operate without state approval. It's the first extraterritorial internet, a network that floats above the old rules. And once that existed, every major power understood the same thing. If you don't build your own system in space, you will be dependent on someone else's. That's why China and Russia moved so quickly. Not because they wanted to compete with Starlink, but because they couldn't afford not to. Starlink didn't just give the world a new kind of internet. It forced every major power to rethink what control actually means. And no two countries reacted faster, or more decisively, than China and Russia. Because for them, Starlink wasn't innovation. It was intrusion. It was a foreign network floating above their borders, capable of operating without permission. A network they couldn't censor, couldn't regulate, and couldn't shut down. And they had seen this pattern before. Long before Starlink, both China and Russia learned a painful lesson. If your critical systems rely on someone else's satellites, you don't have sovereignty. For decades, the world depended on the American GPS system, a military asset controlled by the US Air Force. China and Russia understood the risk immediately, so they built their own. China's BeiDou, Russia's GLONASS. These weren't just navigation tools. They were declarations of independence, early signs that both nations intended to control their own space infrastructure. BeiDou now covers the entire planet. GLONASS remains a core part of Russia's military and civilian systems. This was the first phase of orbital sovereignty. Starlink triggered the second. China saw Starlink's scale, thousands of satellites forming a global mesh, and realized that a sovereign internet on the ground wasn't enough. If the US had an orbital network, China needed one too. So Beijing announced plans for its own mega-constellations. Guowang, National Broadband Constellation. China SatNet, state-run orbital infrastructure. Their goal isn't just connectivity. It's strategic parity. China wants an orbital layer it controls. One that can't be switched off by Washington, one that can't be used to bypass its firewall, and one that can support military operations if needed. In other words, China wants its own Starlink, but with Chinese characteristics. China and Russia share the same conclusion. If you don't control your own orbital infrastructure, you don't control your future. Starlink proved that satellites are no longer passive objects in the sky. They are communication systems, surveillance platforms, military relays, economic lifelines, geopolitical leverage. They are assets and vulnerabilities, and the nations that fail to build their own will be dependent on those who do. Right now, three players are building the foundations of orbital dominance. The United States, the private-public empire. The US empire has something no one else has. A private sector capable of building global constellations at scale. Starlink is just the beginning. Amazon's Kuiper is coming. The Pentagon is integrating commercial satellites into military doctrine. America's advantage isn't just technology, it's ecosystem. China, the state-engineered empire. China is building the opposite model. A fully state-controlled orbital architecture. BeiDou for navigation. Guowang for broadband. SatNet for national security. A firewall that extends into space. China's goal isn't parity. It's insulation, a world where Chinese systems are unavoidable. Russia, the strategic disruptor. Russia can't match the scale of the US or China, but it doesn't need to. Strategy is different. GLONASS for independence. Sphere for resilience. Anti-satellite weapons for deterrence. Russia's power comes from its ability to deny orbital dominance to others. In a world built on satellites, the ability to disable them is as powerful as the ability to launch them. The next superpowers won't be defined by territory. They'll be defined by orbit. Because the nation, or network, that controls the sky, controls the signal, and the one that controls the signal, controls the future. In Part 3, we'll explore the countries trying to stay independent in a world of orbital blocks. The ones building their own systems, the ones resisting alignment, and the ones quietly choosing sides. So until then, this was Cora Duncussing breaking the narrative for the Empire Report.